I worked with a man for about 2 years, maybe a little more, at a mill by a river. This was a long time ago, when I was still young enough to lift heavy things without feeling it the next day. The mill ground grain, wheat mostly, and the work was steady and hard and covered you in dust that got into everything: your clothes, your hair, under your fingernails, in your throat. His name was Thomas, or maybe it was Tomas. I can't remember exactly now. He was older than me by 10 years or so, and he knew the work better, knew the machinery and how to listen to it, how to tell when something was wearing wrong or needed oil or was about to break. He taught me things without making it feel like teaching, just showed me what to do and then watched while I did it. And if I did it wrong, he'd shake his head and show me again. We worked the same hours, started before dawn and finished when the light was going. In between, there was the sound of the millstones turning and the water rushing under the building and the grain pouring through the chutes. And we moved through it all like parts of the same machine, doing what needed doing, not talking much because the noise made talking difficult anyway. He had a family, a wife and children, 3 or 4 of them, I think. He'd mention them sometimes during the breaks we took, sitting outside on the loading platform with our backs against the wall, eating whatever we'd brought for the midday meal. He'd say his daughter was sick, or his son had started helping at the bakery, or his wife was angry about something he'd forgotten to do. He said these things the way you'd mention the weather, just facts, nothing he needed sympathy for or advice about. I didn't have a family then. Didn't have much of anything, except the work and a room I rented above a shop in town. So I'd listen to him talk about his family, and I'd nod, and sometimes I'd ask a question. But mostly, I just listened and ate my bread and felt the sun on my face during those breaks, warm and good after the dim coolness inside the mill. We worked together through seasons, through summer heat and winter cold, through spring floods that made the river run high and fast, and made the mill wheel turn so hard you could feel it in your bones. We got to know each other the way people do when they work side by side, day after day, not through long conversations or shared confidences, but through the rhythm of the work itself, through knowing how the other person moves and thinks and what they'll do before they do it. There was one winter, I remember, when the river froze part way and the wheel wouldn't turn, right? Kept catching and stopping. And we had to go down under the building where the wheel was down into the dark, cold space where the water ran and chip away the ice with axes and poles. It took us most of a day, working in water up to our knees, our hands so cold they stopped feeling like hands, just wooden things at the ends of our arms. He didn't complain, just kept working, steady and methodical, breaking the ice away, piece by piece. And I worked beside him, following his lead. And when we finally got the wheel turning free again, and climbed back up into the mill, soaking wet and shaking from the cold, he looked at me and nodded, just once, and that was enough. After that winter, I noticed he was coughing more, a deep, rattling cough that sounded bad. He'd stop sometimes in the middle of work and bend over with it, his whole body shaking, and when he straightened up, his face would be red and his eyes watery. I asked him if he was all right, and he said he was fine, just a cold that wouldn't leave, and he kept working. Spring came and the cough got worse. He started missing days, and when he was there, he moved slower, like everything cost him more effort than it should. The owner of the mill asked me if I thought Thomas could keep working, and I said I didn't know, and the owner nodded and didn't say anything else about it. One day Thomas didn't come to work, and I worked alone, doing both our jobs as best I could. The next day, he didn't come either. The owner told me Thomas was sick, staying home, and he hired someone else to help me, a younger man who didn't know the work and who I had to teach the way Thomas had taught me. I went to see Thomas once, walked to his house after work one evening. His wife answered the door, and her face was tired and worried, and she said he was sleeping and probably shouldn't be disturbed. I could hear him coughing from somewhere inside the house, that same deep rattling sound, and I gave her some bread ID brought and said to tell him ID asked after him, and she said she would. I never saw him again. A few weeks later, the owner told me Thomas had died, said it quiet and matter of fact, the way you'd tell someone the mill needed a new belt or the grain prices had changed. I nodded and went back to work, and that was that. I stayed at the mill another few months, maybe longer, and then I left, moved on to other work in other places. I don't remember why I left exactly, just that it felt like time to go, like whatever had been holding me there had finished. I think about Thomas sometimes, about those 2 years we worked together, about the things he showed me and the things we did side by side in that mill by the river. I don't know what happened to his family, his wife and children, where they went, or what they did after he was gone. I don't know if they stayed in that town or moved away, if they managed all right or struggled. But I remember him, the way he worked, steady and careful, the way he knew the mill and the machinery, the way he moved through each day, doing what needed doing without complaint or fuss. And I remember that winter day under the mill, breaking ice in the freezing water, and the nod he gave me when we finished, that simple acknowledgement that we'd done something hard together and seen it through. There was a man I met one time, just for an evening, in a place where travelers stopped to rest. This was years ago, when I was moving from one place to another, walking mostly, carrying what I owned in a pack on my back. The place wasn't much, just a building beside a road with a few tables and a fire and food if you had money to pay for it. I came in after dark, tired from walking all day, and the place was mostly empty except for a few people scattered at different tables, eating or drinking or just sitting. I got some food, bread and stew, I think, and I sat down at a table near the fire because the night was cold and the warmth felt good. The man was sitting at the next table, alone, with a cup in front of him. He was older, maybe 50 or 60, with gray hair and a weathered face, and hands that looked like they'd done hard work for a long time. He wasn't eating, just sitting there, looking into his cup like he was reading something written at the bottom of it. After a while, he looked up and saw me watching him, and he nodded, and I nodded back, and that was how it started. He asked where I was coming from and where I was going, the usual questions travelers ask each other, and I told him, and then he told me where he'd come from, some town I'd never heard of, and where he was going, another town I didn't know. We started talking, the slow, easy way people talk when they know they won't see each other again, when there's no reason to hold anything back or pretend to be something you're not. He told me about his life, about the work he'd done, the places he'd been, the things he'd seen. He'd worked on boats, he said, on rivers and lakes, hauling cargo and passengers, spending more time on water than on land. He talked about the boats he'd known, their names, and what they carried, and what they were like to work on. He talked about storms he'd been through, water so rough it threw you against the walls and made you wonder if the boat would hold together. He talked about calm days when the water was smooth as glass and the sky went on forever and you could see clear to the bottom where the fish moved, slow and lazy in the green light. He talked about the people he'd worked with, captains and crew, some good and some bad, some careful and some reckless. He told me about a captain he'd sailed with for years, who could read the water like other men read books, who knew where the channels ran deep and where the rocks hid just under the surface, who never lost a boat or a cargo or a man. He told me about places along the rivers, towns and villages, where the boats stopped to load or unload, where people came down to the docks to buy fish or grain or whatever the boats were carrying. He said some of these places were friendly and some weren't, some where people were glad to see you and some where they watched you with hard eyes and were happy when you left. I listened and ate my food and watched the fire burn, and it felt good to sit there and listen to someone else's life unfold in words to hear about a world I'd never been part of, but could imagine from what he told me. After a while, I started telling him things too, about the work I'd done, the places I'd been, the people I'd known. I told him about the mill and Thomas, and the winter we broke ice together. I told him about other jobs, other towns, other times. And he listened the way I'd listened to him, nodding sometimes, asking questions sometimes, but mostly just letting me talk. We sat there for hours, I think, though I wasn't paying attention to time. The fire burned low, and someone came and put more wood on it, and other people came and went, but we stayed where we were, talking and listening, sharing stories, the way travelers do when they meet by chance and know they'll part in the morning. He told me about his family, a wife who'd died years ago, children who'd grown up and moved away, and who he didn't see much anymore. He said it without sadness, just as fact, the way things were. He said he'd thought about stopping the boat work, finding a place to settle, but he never had, kept taking jobs on different boats, moving from one place to another, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. I told him I was the same way, always moving, never putting down roots, not because I didn't want to, but because it never seemed like the right time or the right place. And by the time I thought maybe it was, I'd already decided to move on again. He said he understood that, said a lot of people were like that, especially people who'd spent their lives working jobs that took them from place to place. He said maybe we were born that way, or maybe the work made us that way, or maybe it didn't matter which it was, because the result was the same: we kept moving. The fire burned lower, and the night got later, and the place emptied out until it was just the two of us, and the person who ran the place, cleaning up and getting ready to close. The man finished his drink and stood up, said he needed to sleep because he was leaving early in the morning. I said I was too, and we walked outside together into the cold night. We stood there for a moment, looking up at the stars, which were bright and clear and countless. He said something about the stars, how they were the same everywhere, how you could be on a boat in the middle of a lake, or standing on a road in the middle of nowhere, and the stars would look the same. I said I'd noticed that too, and he nodded. Then he held out his hand, and I shook it, and he said it was good talking to me, and I said it was good talking to him too, and that was it. He walked off toward wherever he was sleeping, and I went to the small room I'd paid for, and in the morning we both left, him one direction and me another, and I never saw him again. I don't remember his name, if he even told me his name, but I remember that evening, sitting by the fire, talking and listening, sharing pieces of our lives with each other for no reason except that we were both there and both alone and both willing to talk. It felt good. That conversation felt like something real, even though it only lasted a few hours and led nowhere and meant nothing in the larger scheme of things. Sometimes I wonder what happened to him, if he's still working on boats, or if he finally stopped, if he's still alive, or if he died somewhere along the way. I wonder if he remembers that evening the way I do, or if it was just another night among many nights, another stranger among many strangers, nothing special or memorable. But for me it was something. That night, that conversation, it reminded me that you don't have to know someone for years to connect with them. That sometimes a few hours is enough. That sometimes the best conversations are the ones you have with people you'll never see again, because there's a freedom in that, a honesty, a willingness to be yourself without worrying about what comes next. There was someone I used to see on the road, a woman who walked the same routes I did, though never at the same time, never quite crossing paths. I'd come into a town or a village, and someone would mention her. Say a woman had passed through the day before or the week before, walking alone, carrying a pack, heading the same direction I was heading. Or I'd be walking, and I'd see signs of her a fire circle, still warm from the night before. Footprints in mud that were smaller than mine, a mark on a tree at a crossing where someone had scratched an arrow pointing the way they'd gone. I started to recognize these signs, started to know when she'd been somewhere recently, started to feel like I was following her, even though I wasn't trying to, even though I had my own reasons for going where I was going. Sometimes I'd see her in the distance, a figure on the road ahead of me, too far away to catch up to, moving at a steady pace that matched mine. I'd watch her for a while, see how she walked, how she carried herself, and then I'd look away for a moment, and when I looked back, she'd be gone, turned off onto another path, or just moved out of sight beyond a bend or a hill. Once I stayed at the same place she'd stayed the night before, a farm where travelers could sleep in the barn if they asked permission. The farmer mentioned her when I asked if I could stay, said a woman had slept there the previous night, said she'd been polite and quiet and had left early without waking anyone. I asked what she looked like, and he described her height, dark hair, somewhere in her 30s or 40s. Nothing remarkable, just someone who looked like she'd been walking for a long time. I slept in the same spot she'd slept, on the same hay in the same corner of the barn, and I wondered about her, about why she was walking, where she was going, what her life was like. But these were just passing thoughts, idle curiosity, nothing that stayed with me after I left the next morning. I saw her once, properly saw her, close enough to see her face. It was in a market in a town I'd stopped in to buy supplies. I was looking at vegetables, trying to decide what to buy, when I noticed her at another stall across the way. She was doing the same thing, considering what to buy, weighing options, the practical thoughts that go through everyone's mind when money is limited and choices matter. I watched her for a moment, saw that she looked tired, that her clothes were worn and dusty, that her pack was old and patched in several places. She looked like me, I realized, looked like every other person who spent their life walking from place to place, working when they could, moving on when they couldn't. She must have felt me watching because she looked up and our eyes met for a second. I nodded and she nodded back, just a simple acknowledgement to travelers recognizing each other. Then she turned back to what she was doing, and so did I, and we finished our shopping and left the market separately, and that was the only time I ever saw her face. After that, I kept noticing her signs on the road, kept hearing about her in the places I stopped. She was always ahead of me, always a day or two ahead, moving at the same pace I was moving, going to the same kinds of places, doing the same kinds of work. I learned more about her from these fragments. She was a seamstress, apparently, or did mending and alterations, worked in exchange for food or a place to sleep, or a little money. She was quiet, people said, didn't talk much, kept to herself, did good work. I thought about catching up to her sometimes, about walking faster, or starting earlier, or asking where she was going next, and going there directly instead of taking my time. I thought maybe we could walk together, or at least talk, share information about the road ahead, about places to stay, about work that might be available. But I never did, never tried to catch up, never made the effort. Maybe I didn't want to disturb whatever rhythm she'd found, whatever solitude she needed. Maybe I didn't want to risk disappointment, the possibility that we'd have nothing to say to each other, that the idea of her I'd built in my mind was more interesting than the reality. Or maybe I just liked it the way it was, liked knowing she was out there somewhere ahead of me, liked the signs she left behind, liked the feeling of moving through the world in parallel with someone else, even if we never spoke. The last time I heard about her was years ago now. I was in a town I'd been through before, and I asked about her out of habit. And the person I asked said yes, she'd been through, but it had been months ago, maybe longer. They said she'd mentioned heading north, far north, up where the winters were hard and the summers short, where fewer people went and the roads were rougher. I thought about going that way, about following her one more time, about maybe finally catching up, finally talking to her, finally learning who she really was beyond the fragments and signs and secondhand reports. But I didn't. I went west instead, toward work I'd heard about, toward places I'd never been, toward whatever was next. And that was the end of it. The end of those years of following someone I never knew, never spoke to, never really met. I don't know what happened to her. Don't know if she's still walking, or if she settled somewhere, or if something else happened. I don't know if she knew I was behind her, if she noticed my signs the way I noticed hers, if she ever wondered about me the way I wondered about her. But she's still there in my memory, that woman on the road, always ahead, always moving, a kind of companion who never was a companion, a presence that shaped my journey without ever being part of it. The fire's low now, just embers mostly, giving off a little heat and a little light. The night's deep and quiet around us. If you like sitting here listening, you can come back another night. There's always room by the fire.